Okay, so today we're going to talk about yeast and hopefully we'll get to salt. The Hebrew word for yeast is shemarim. Shemarim. It represents, I think most everybody kind of knows, even in the church, people I think are pretty well aware that yeast represents sin, but they don't really realize that it also represents false doctrines. So we're going to talk about yeast being sin and false doctrines. Now, the word yeast, marim or shemarim, the root of it is mar. Mar means bitter. So it's a bitterness. Shannon, as you know, means that or which. And marim is rises. So yeast is something bitter that makes things rise. Technically, if you want to know the technical part, yeast are single cell fungus. Yep, you read that right. Yeast is a fungus and it is alive. There are many different types of yeast in the world, and while some of them make us sick and some cause food to spoil, yet others can be made to make bread rise and in the fermentation of beer and wine. So it has its good, good and bad parts. The process called alcoholic fermentation produces useful end products, carbon dioxide gas, and ethanol alcohol. These end products are released by the yeast cells into the surrounding liquid in the dough. In bread baking, when yeast ferments, the sugars available from the flour and or from added sugar produce carbon dioxide gas, which cannot escape because the dough is elastic and stretchable. As a result of this expanding gas, the dough inflates or rises. So there's just a technical process of what's happening, which I thought was interesting. And it also relates to what we're talking about today. So the combination of yeast and sugar, like I said, back in Jesus' day, they probably used honey, but today we usually use sugar, will cause the yeast to multiply rapidly and produce gas that cannot escape, making it puffed up. So it's going to be real important later on to remember that yeast is made more puffed up by the use of sugar. And when we find out what sugar is, we'll see what happens in the congregation or our churches. So how is sin and false doctrine like yeast? So we're going to look at that. Well, leaven is a picture of sin. The departure of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt is symbolic of an individual leaving the slavery of a sinful life. Romans 6:17-18 explains, but God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. So we're going to be a slave to something, right? So we're either a slave to our sinfulness or we're slaves to the Lord and his righteousness. God is more concerned with our learning how to live righteously than he is with how we prepare our bread to eat. Still, God teaches human beings through the use of physical examples or analogies to drive home a point. Notice that principle in 1 Corinthians 5:6-8. Your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore, purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So basically, when we become believers, what does the Lord take from us? What does he make us? What happens to our lives?
Well, he covers the sin. So it's the wickedness is no longer seen by him.
Right.
So it's like our leaven is not, it's almost like not there. If we're
Right,
willing,
right.
if we, okay.
He started a whole new batch of dough, so to speak. We've become a new man, okay? And so we're a new batch of dough without the leaven. So remember, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, about the picture of the unleavened bread at Passover. We basically have become the unleavened bread when we become a believers, because the Lord has taken away all of our sin, okay? So what he's saying here is you need to take all that leaven out. Therefore, purge out the old leaven, take out your sin, that you may be a new lump, that now you're starting all over. You've thrown out that old sinful nature, and now you are a new lump without sin. But it's a picture of the leaven. So they're starting over. The woman that's baking the bread, she's put too much leaven in there, or maybe she didn't want it to rise, and so she had to throw it out. And so we're not going to have the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So we're taking out the wickedness, which is a picture of the leaven in our lives. So it's a picture of sin. Leaven pictures false doctrine. Now, I think most people would say leaven is a picture of sin, but they don't really realize that it's also a picture of false doctrines. In Matthew 23, Christ referred to the Pharisees as hypocrites who should have known better. He warned his disciples to avoid this type of behavior by using leaven as the metaphor of this sinful conduct. Jesus Christ showed little tolerance for the religious leaders of his day. Jesus said to them, "Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." But the disciples reasoned among themselves, saying, "It's because we have no bread." They didn't understand. So he was more specific then in telling them what he was meaning. He said, but Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Oh, you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, or how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, and how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I do not speak of you to you concerning bread, but to be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So the sinfulness of the Pharisees and Sadducees would not affect the disciples, right? That was their sinfulness. That was their yeast. What was going to affect them, or what the Lord wanted us to be aware of, is the sinfulness of false doctrine that creeps in. So people that you admire, or people that you think should know better, you need to be aware that sometimes they have false doctrine, and when that gets into your life, that's going to cause you to be full of yeast. So it also a picture of false doctrines. So if you have sin and you have false doctrine, it's also a picture of disobedience. The Apostle Paul also referred to leavening when teaching the Galatians about obedience to God's laws. There were those who distorted God's grace into a license to sin. Have we seen that today? Paul made the point that a small amount of misrepresentation of the truth can lead to large amounts of confusion and deceit, which is happening today in our churches. Galatians 5:7-10 contains his warning. You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. Once again, sin and false doctrine is shown to be like leavening, expanding into the surrounding bread. And in another one of my symbols, we talk about the dough. The dough is the bread. which is the church or the congregation. So it expands in the dough, in this case, other Christians. And God has little patience with those who would deter others and cause them to misunderstand and obey his word. So not only is leaven a picture of sin in our lives that grows and grows and grows. And I mean, everybody knows if you tell one little sin, usually that sin leads to other little lies and other little lies, and then, you know, other things. So we all know how sin grows in our life, but false doctrine is the same thing in the church or the congregations, or even someone, you know, you may respect somebody and they tell you something that's false, and you believe it without, you know, doing your own little research, or maybe the Holy Spirit doesn't really, you know, prick your heart and say, you know, that may not be true. I think most of us, for the most part, we want to think people are telling us the truth. You know what I'm saying? I think we have a really hard time. I know I always wanted to believe and trust my government and my leaders, but it seems like recently we've seen that they can't be trusted.
Right.
But I think naturally in our hearts, we want to trust people.
Right.
And so it's really hard when it creeps into the church through our leadership. So we need to be careful. It can also happen with other Christians in the church too, that you think are more spiritual than you. You don't think much of yourself, or maybe you think God wouldn't speak to you. I mean, when you're a baby Christian, you don't think that God would actually be telling you that's not true, but he does. He shares with us, and we're going to talk more about the leaven that enters the church and how it deceives us in a minute here. All right, right now we're going to talk a little bit about Passover. I think last time we went through this, you all told me that I should talk more about the unleavened bread at Passover. So I think this is new. It might be new. So Passover, the unleavened bread. So Exodus 12:14-20 says, Shavat Yamim Matzot Toechelu, which is for 7 days. Those of you that are learning Hebrew, is Shavat Yamim is 7 days. Matzot is matzah, and toechelu is you will eat. So for 7 days you will eat matzah. Matzah, also spelled matzo, so because sometimes you'll see it matzo, is unleavened bread made from just flour and water without yeast and baked before it has a chance to rise. And so, like I said, later in another presentation, we're going to talk about dough. Dough is basically just water and flour. There's no yeast in the dough until you put the yeast in. It's not going to be bread. It's just going to be dough. So you have dough here of just flour and water, and baked before it has a chance to rise. It is eaten on Passover Eve, or started. That's when it started. But there's a whole feast. Shannon, what's the feast that we celebrate at this time?
The feast that we celebrated this time during Passover?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
What's it actually called?
The Feast of Unleavened Bread?
Right. So the feast itself is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Passover is not a feast.
One day.
It's just one day. It's actually just a meal. Okay. Passover is just a meal during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the technical moedim or feast is unleavened bread. But because Passover is so popular and everybody looks forward to Passover, and that's what everybody thinks about, and nobody wants to think about the unleavened bread because do you know the other word for unleavened bread? Bread of affliction. They call it the bread of affliction because, I mean, it's not that tasty. I've kind of grown to have an affinity for it. I mean, what's affinity? That's bad. No, I enjoy matzah. I like peanut butter on it. You put chocolate, you can melt cheese on it. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff with it if you get creative. But Yeah, it's called the bread of affliction. So no one's going, oh, I'm looking so forward to the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Right, right.
So Passover is just one meal, but it's come to kind of represent the whole week of unleavened bread.
It's like the word Passover has taken on a different meaning. It's one of those words now that over encompasses something that it wasn't first, that wasn't the first original definition of it.
Right, right. And of course, where do we get the word Passover?
Because of the blood over the door, and the angel of death passed over the Israelites when they were getting ready to leave.
Right. And so the Passover meal basically is just one meal that you have where you remember that event. So it's not really a feast, but we call it a feast now, Feast of Passover. So at the Passover meal, there is a matzah bag with 3 compartments each. Now, this is Jewish tradition, so we're not talking about Messianic tradition. At the Passover meal, there is a matzah bag with 3 compartments, each with its own piece of matzah. So you have 3 pieces of matzah. They're all separated and have their own little compartment. One half is, during the meal, the middle piece is taken out and broken in half. One half is wrapped in a linen cloth and hidden. So the mother of the house takes it and she goes and hides it in the house. The other half is replaced into the bag where it stays as one unit. At the end of the meal, the children look for this hidden piece and shout, I found it with joy, because the piece of matzah is redeemed with something of value. Now, the Jews don't understand this at all. They just basically do it. They don't really understand what it means. They say, well, maybe this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, why would you take Isaac and break him? You know? Then they'll say, well, maybe it's the prophets, the priests, and the king. Well, the prophets, the priests aren't taken out and broken either. So they have a really hard time with this, but they do it. And they have fun. The kids have fun finding it and getting money. They usually get money. Well, those of us who are Messianic believers who know about Yeshua, it's so beautiful. It's just a perfect picture of the Trinity, the 3 in 1, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And of course, the Son was taken from heaven out of the oneness of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. He was broken. He was wrapped in white linen. He was buried, and then he rose again. So for us, it's very beautiful picture of what Yeshua came and did.
Yeah.
So as Messianic believers, we see this as a picture of Yeshua, the sinless, yeastless bread of life. So Yeshua is sinless. He didn't have any yeast. As one with the Father and the Holy Spirit, he left his holy palace so his body could be broken for us, wrapped in white linen and buried in a tomb. Then after 3 days, he rose again. Those of us who search for God's salvation will find Yeshua and be filled with joy because he has redeemed us with his blood. And sometimes, actually, it's kind of funny because sometimes they do this close to the beginning of the Passover meal. It can be 3 hours before they actually let the kids go find the matzah. Their meals are really long. If you come to a Messianic Passover, it's not that long, except for maybe the fellowship before and afterwards. So anyway, that's a picture there. And that's why when we do our communion, we usually, I would say most congregation, I have seen a couple churches that use just bread, like they'll take a loaf of bread, which is okay. It's just a picture, but that's why a lot of times they will use unleavened bread for the bread and the wine. Because when Jesus had his last Passover meal, that's what he had in his hand, was a piece of matzah. This is my body, which was broken for you. And there are some messianics, we don't know for sure because it's not really that specific. But we believe that when Yeshua said this, he had actually it's called the Afikomen. It has a name. The Afikomen is the middle piece of matzah. We feel like maybe he took that middle piece of matzah, the Afikomen, and broke it. And he said, this is my body, which was broken for you. So, I mean, it's just a beautiful picture. Take and eat in remembrance of me. So beautiful. Anybody have any questions about yeast?
I do wonder, Sue, on the word afikomen in Hebrew, if we looked at the letters, I know we keep talking about doing a symbols class, but I wonder what the letters in that word, the symbols are.
Interesting. Afikomen is not Hebrew.
Oh, what is it?
It's Greek.
Oh.
And I forgot what it meant.
Okay.
To break or something like that.
Okay.
I'll look into what it is, but it's not a Hebrew word.
Okay.
I do remember that studying that one time. I was kind of surprised. Remember, well, not remember, but you have to realize that a lot of these traditions came after Yeshua. And so they're not in the Bible. These are just things that God, I guess, has directed man to do. And it's just so interesting how God directed the Jewish people to have the Trinity. It's called the Trinity bag. I mean, the unity bag. Sorry. It's called a unity bag.
Got it.
So why did the Jews have a unity bag if they don't even know what it means?
Right. Right.
So it's a God thing. It's just a God thing. But somehow God incorporated all of this beautiful messianic picture in the Jewish traditions, even though they don't even understand it. But I do think that to some extent, that is why he came to the Jew first, because he knew they had all these traditions. And we don't know when the tradition of the unity bag, or we don't know when that tradition came about. So I don't know. It's just a miracle. Let's just say it's a miracle of God, because the Jews have these traditions and they don't even understand them themselves. All right, anything else? All right, we're going to go on to salt. Salt in Hebrew is malak. Malak is salt. Now, if someone asks you, what is salt in the Bible? What do you think you would say?
Seasoning is the only word I come up with.
Seasoning? I think most people do realize that we are salt, right? They say, oh, well, Christians are salt. Well, it means a little bit more than that, because it's not just Christians that are salt. It's not just the fact that we're here. I hear people say, well, the fact that Christians are here when they're taken away, well, it's not just the fact that our bodies are here. Salt is more than that. Salt is the testimony of God's word. So it's not just a Christian. A Christian is not really valuable. It's not salt. Or he or she is not salt if he's not a testimony. Who knows? I mean, how is a Christian valuable if he doesn't have a testimony? So we're going to talk about that. Salt is basically the testimony of God's word. So we're going to look at salt real quick. Salt, the human body contains many salts. Sodium chloride is a major one, making it around 4% of the body's weight, equivalent to seawater. Salt has been used as a preservative for ages and works to preserve food. So that's the one thing I think that most people think about. Oh, well, Christians are salt. As long as Christians are here on the earth, we're preserving the world. I think that's the basic thing that most Christians think about. But salt is more than that. But let's look at what the Bible says about salt. The first one is that we know that it's a major one, is Atem Malach Haaretz. Whoops, where
Salt
did
of
it
the
go?
earth.
It left. You are the salt of the land. So those of you that know Hebrew, look, see how you're beginning to translate?
Mhm.
Atem Malach Haaretz, you're the salt of the land. Ve'im Tovad Lamalach. So if you lose the salt, im is if, malach, lose the salt. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Malihuto, of his presence. You know, if you lose the salt of his presence, well, what does that mean? We'll look a little farther. Kitzad tuk zarlu. How will he disperse it? So to me, when I read this, I thought, oh my word, that's so much deeper than the verse that we learn in the Bible that says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how should it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Well, it doesn't really say salt loses its flavor. It's saying if you lose his presence, if
Mhm.
you lose his testimony, how is he going to disperse it?
Mhm.
It's, so I don't know. I mean, it's a beautiful verse, but where in the world they got the word flavor, I don't know. So it's basically, they should have said, but if the salt loses its testimony.
Mhm.
So basically, salt is the testimony of God's word, and we are the testimony of God's word. So then we have Mark 9:50, salt loses saltiness. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? So when you think of the fact that salt is our testimony, when we have the presence of the Lord, we have his testimony. Being a witness is good. That's what we're supposed to be. We are witnesses for him. We are the salt that
Mhm.
seasons the land. But if you lose your witness or your credibility, people, how many major preachers have been caught in sinful acts and they've lost their credibility? That harms Christianity.
Mhm.
It doesn't harm just that person.
Right.
And then how can you make your witness believable again? So it's very, very hard if you lose your testimony to regain your influence with other people who are not believers. Now, if you have been an unbeliever and you've been in all that stuff and you find Yeshua and you find the Lord and you're changed, now that's a testimony. But if you fall back, then that's hard. It's hard to come back from that. I'm not saying it's possible. It's impossible. It's not impossible, but how can you make it your witness believable again? All right, let's see. We got some verses here. 2 Kings 2:21 says, then he went out to the spring and threw salt into it, saying, this is what the Lord says, I have healed this water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. And basically, it's a picture of if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and repent, then I will heal their land. So we are like salt thrown upon the waters. And waters, of course, represent the nations. And so we're thrown into the nations to heal it and to make it pure. So that's our testimony, is going to do that. Water is life, not livable without the influence of salt purifying it. 2 Chronicles 13:5 says, uh-oh, do I have that one? Hold on, guys. Maybe I'm going the wrong way. Oh, here it is. I have them all written down. Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt? A covenant of salt. Salt necessary for life, a preservative, a cleansing, a redeeming agent. So the covenant of salt is the testimony. So David and his descendants are a testimony forever. They're a covenant of salt. Colossians 4:6. Speech seasoned with salt. So it says, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So what, in this case, what would you say? Seasoned, your conversation seasoned with salt. What would that mean to you?
Well, if it's his testimony, as we are a witness of his testimony, I would think just how we speak.
Exactly. How we speak. We should always praise the Lord. Our conversation should always be a testimony to God. It should be seasoned with salt, with love, with patience, with just talking about, oh, the Lord has done this for me today. Or, God loves you, or, just a conversation seasoned with salt. So Deuteronomy 29:23 says, the whole land is devastated by sulfur and salt. It is a wasteland with nothing growing, like Sodom and Gomorrah, which the Lord destroyed by his intense anger.
And what's that?
And so what did Lot's wife turn into? Turned into a pillar of salt, right? So salt is a testimony, can be a testimony of God's anger too. So the pillar of salt was a testimony that God's righteous anger. It was still a testimony, but like a lot of things that we've looked at, sometimes it's a testimony of his love, sometimes it's a testimony of his anger. All right, salt intake is vital to life. So one time I was doing something for my class at school. I was doing this yes, no thing. Yes or no. Yes or no, salt is good for us. And so the kids would write down whether they thought yes or no. At this time, it was a big deal that nobody should eat salt. Okay. So I did this. And of course, most of the class said, yeah, salt is bad for us. So salt, they were thinking salt was bad for us. So I found this to show them that no, we need salt in our life. You don't want to go without salt totally. Maybe you're eating too much salt or the wrong kind of salt, but you have to have salt in your diet. So here are all the things that salt does. I won't go through them, but as I read some of the highlighted ones, think about what your testimony does, okay? Because salt is your testimony. So salt is a regulation of blood pressure. Salt extracts excess acidity. Salt is vital for balancing the sugar levels, which we're going to talk about sugar here in a minute. Salt gives us energy. Salt helps our brain cells work. Salt helps us absorb food. So our testimony helps us to absorb the food of God's word. Salt is vital in clearing up congestion of the sinuses. It's a structure for the bones. It helps us sleep. In other words, it gives us peace. And the main thing that salt does is maintains reproduction. So you have to have salt in order to reproduce. So if salt is a testimony of God's word, do you see what all it does? Our testimony. Okay, and the main thing it does is helps God reproduce. So how's God going to reproduce if we're not a testimony for him? Correct? Do you have any other comments on these things that salt does that we should be doing or we do to help the world?
I don't know about that. I know that recently, about 3 months ago at the doctor, they asked me how much salt I ate. And I was like, oh, I'm really good. I don't eat too much salt. And they're like, yeah, you don't eat any salt. And they were like, you need to eat salt. So
Exactly.
I was low on iodine. So
Yes,
they said that is a myth that everybody needs to not eat salt. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Salt is also a very healing agent. And a lot of times if you have a sore and you soak it in salt water, it heals so much faster. So it's also a healing.
Wow,
And-
yeah. That's true.
And Christians are supposed to be healing in the land.
That's right. Very good. That's awesome. That's awesome. I did have one little Hispanic boy in my class. He came up to me later. He said, Miss Mon, would you give me a copy of that to give to my mom? She has taken salt out of everything. And he says it tastes horrible. So he came back later and said, gracias. Because his mother was at least adding some salt, because food doesn't taste good without salt. It just does not taste good without salt. Almost everything that you make has salt in it. Okay, so now we're going to go back to a little bit of yeast. What does yeast need to make bread rise? So a combination of yeast and what makes the bread rise? Do you know?
I would think flour, right?
No?
No,
Sugar.
I
sugar.
was gonna
That's
say, isn't it sugar? Yeah.
Sugar. So I imagine they used a little bit of honey to make the yeast rise. Now things will rise without it, just yeast, but not a lot. It just like puffs up a little bit. But if you want a really nice loaf of bread, you want it to really rise, you have to have sugar. So we're going to look a little bit about sugar. I found this picture here, which I thought was perfect. Be careful who you trust. Salt and sugar look the same. You cannot tell the difference between salt and sugar, especially some of these larger pieces of salt now, and the larger sugar little cubes. I mean, you just can't tell the difference between salt and sugar unless you taste it. So you need to be careful who you trust. Salt and sugar look the same. So we've been talking about salt, or the testimony of God's people. But sugar looks and acts, it's sort of like sugar is kind of like the tare. When we talked about the wheat and the tares, sugar is a counterfeit Christian that's in the church, but it's more than that. It's more than that, because sugar causes sin and false doctrine to rise, causes it to be puffed up. So what is it? It's a spiritual counterfeit. It's the Jezebel spirit. So sugar is the Jezebel spirit. Revelation 2:20 says, nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you have allowed that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce. So this spirit, the spirit of Jezebel, is sugar. It's in the church. The Bible warns against it. Don't let her. But we're going to look at some of the attributes of sugar, or the Jezebel spirit. 1, it controls by manipulation. A lot of times it's very sweet. It seduces, it flatters, it promotes themselves. It brags about their accomplishments. It networks with people that don't know them. They lie and they gaslight. So this can be both a man or a woman. Typically people, when they think of Jezebel spirit, they think of a woman. And a woman who does, oh, they're so sweet, and they flatter and they seduce a man. But it's not just a woman. It could be a man doing the same thing to a woman. But it's not just a sexual thing either. It can also be a spiritual thing. I don't know why that went away. Next, they tend to promote themselves as some sort of religious superiority. They'll say to you things like, be real careful when you hear this. God told me to tell you. If someone comes up to me and says that, I run. I'm like, I run away from that person because I'm like, why didn't he tell me? I know God. God loves me. You know, God can tell me this. He doesn't have to tell you. And so that's one of the things they do because they want you to go to them, or they want you to feel like they know more than you do. They are closer to God than you are. They'll say things, let me pray for your answer and I'll tell you what to do. Okay. They don't say, I'll pray for you. I pray that God speak to you. No, it's like, here again, it's kind of a, I'm better than you, so let me do it for you. They claim to have a word from God that no one else has. They always have visions or dreams and can actually give some true prophecies, but they're not 100% accurate. Has anybody known anybody like this? Hello? Is anybody there?
I'm there.
Okay.
I think I've ran into people like this. I definitely ran into people,
Yes.
I think it's even worse when it's in the church. And the minute you said all this, I thought of one person and I thought, what a terrible thing, Sandra. But I know someone in my church that reminds me of just what you're saying.
Well, they're in the church, and they seem like the most religious, spiritual people ever. I hate to say it. And I'm not saying they're not a Christian as such. I'm saying they have a Jezebel spirit, and you can be susceptible to this Jezebel spirit. And I think today more than ever, people are susceptible to this because they want people to think they're more spiritual than other people. A spirit of pride. I mean, Jezebel has a spirit of pride, but it's not humbleness. It's not a humility. It's more of, I can do this and you can't. There was a lady who came up to me and said, have you had any dreams lately? I can interpret them for you. I'm like, what? I don't know. I've met a lot of these, so maybe I'm just around more of these people than you are, but they're in the church, yes. Charismatic, they're charismatic personalities. They're sharp, intelligent, attractive, sweet, charmers, but they're never wrong. God just redirected them. They're easily angered or have hurt feelings if you confront them. A lot of these people, unfortunately, rise to leadership because they're kind of pushy. Well, I can do that. They volunteer for everything. Let me do it. So, I mean, it's very, very hard. You can't tell the difference between salt and sugar. I'm telling you. These are just some of the characteristics. And I'm not saying they're bad people as such, but you got to watch them. You got to really be careful because God has warned us not to allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. Read that again. It says, she calls herself a prophetess and she's teaching. So she's managed to control, manipulate, make people feel she has some sort of superiority. So, I hate to say this. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but there are these people in our church that we look up to that we have to be kind of careful of. The other thing that Jezebel spirit has is basically they're based on feelings rather than a biblical principle. So you might, confront them about something and they'll say, well, it doesn't mean that to me. Or I feel that was just for people a long time ago. Or God gave me a different interpretation. or God has revealed to me that's not true anymore. I guess I'm just around the wrong people, but I have good people here today. So my best friends are not like this at all. I'm telling you, most of my friends, I have a very humble spirit, and they would never have try to manipulate or make people think they're superior in any way. So yeast, sin and false doctrine can't rise without sugar. So all of these things, when a Jezebel spirit comes into a congregation, if they get control, then that's when they can manipulate the false doctrine. So most people that are in a church manipulating the false doctrine have a Jezebel spirit, because that's how the yeast or the sin rises. People are influenced. More people are influenced by the Jezebel spirit, the sugar. Sugar is addictive. There was a lady in my church, and she was a teacher of a woman's Sunday school class. And there was a woman who came out of her class and came to my class, and she was telling me that this lady was just like this. She told everybody, if you have a prayer need, come to me. Give me your prayer need. I'll pray for you and I'll tell you what to do. She said those exact words. She was a manipulator. She basically told them she was a prophetess. She was teaching in a Sunday school class. And this lady said to me, you know, it was very addictive, because I didn't have to search the scriptures myself. I didn't have to read the Bible myself. All I had to do was go to this person. This person would search the scriptures for me. She would pray for me. She would do all these things for me, and I didn't have to do it. So it became very addictive. Sugar makes you feel good temporarily, but then you crash, because then you realize that you're not the one that's actually being able to go to God. You're relying on someone else, and if that person fails, or that person doesn't live up to what you think they should live up, then you crash. Some people who are so attached to certain leaders, and they find out their leader has been caught in sin or anything like that, they don't go to church anymore. So they just crash, because they have been addicted to a person and to their words, rather than to the person of Yeshua, Jesus Christ, and the word of God. So it's a Jezebel, it's a spirit. All right, that's all that we're going to do today.